Hey guys, Justin here. A question I get a lot from people just getting into iRacing, maybe from road racing or just racing in general, ask me, what is the etiquette for oval racing and iRacing because it seems vastly different to everything else that they've raced before. So today I wanted to showcase a bunch of quick scenarios of good etiquette in oval racing and bad etiquette in oval racing. And also a big thanks to WTF Racing League. They provided me with some footage while I was gone for vacation, but I never got to use it, so I'm just going to include some of it here, and you guys can go check them out. The first thing we're going to go over is oval restarts, and honestly, it's pretty similar to rolling starts in road. It's against sporting code to leave too big of a gap in front of you, but I would say a good idea is you don't want more than half a car length in front of you for it to be good etiquette. By laying off and then trying to build up speed for a restart, you're pretty much putting yourself in an advantage at the cost of everyone else who's just trying to race fairly. But there are times where you just either time the restart really well or have great reactions and are faster than the cars in front of you off a restart. Well, what do you do then? At this point, it is completely acceptable to take your car where there is an opening or a hole for you to take your momentum and potentially even make it 3 wide. I know that 3 wide can be a big point of contention for some people, but on oval restarts you have to keep in mind that track position is key and the best way to pass cars is in the first couple laps of the run at most tracks. So taking this into account, being aggressive but also being clean in those moves is very important, and you should not block a move like that, especially if there's a huge speed differential, because that will just put everyone at risk. Now let's move on to side-by-side racing. So the fundamental concept of etiquette while racing side by side is recognizing what everyone's best lines are when you are on the top and when you're on the bottom. When you're on the bottom, even though you're not going to be able to track all the way out to the wall, in return you get to run the bottom most viable line. Notice I didn't say the bottom line, I said the bottom most viable line. Well, what does that mean? So certain tracks, let's take for instance Michigan, the bottom groove exists, but it's not fast compared to the second groove and the third groove. So when this is the case, the bottom car is not forced to run that bottom line in terms of oval etiquette. What they instead get is the bottom most viable line, which in this case would be the second groove. This is a discrepancy with a lot of people who don't have a lot of experience in oval because they see a car not go all the way to the bottom and seemingly force contact, when instead you have to realize that the bottom car is entitled to that main second groove because that is the bottom most viable line. So if you're this bottom car in a side-by-side, one thing to do that's pretty bad etiquette in oval racing is to arc the car out on top of you. So what this means is you will take a straighter entry into the corner and force them to either door bang you or take a very bad wide entry that they don't even know when you're going to turn down the hill. This is a pretty good way to pass a car on the outside, but you're going to make a lot of enemies because you are taking away their viable line. It's a pretty greedy way to pass, and if you're going to do it, you better hope that you can drive away from them. Now, as the top car, it's your responsibility not to squeeze the bottom car too hard. Now, this is pretty self-policing because a car who gets squeezed on the bottom is pretty much just going to wreck the top car as well. But keep in mind that different tracks require different amounts of room to be given. So at a car that handles really tight on a track, you want to give them maybe a little less room because they can handle it. But if the car is super out of control, super loose, and they can barely even hold it as is, they may require a little more room up top in order to survive the corner. At the end of the day, it's the respectful thing to do and good for the survival of both cars involved. Another thing that the top car has to realize is that when they have a car on their inside, it's their responsibility to drive all the way up to the wall to give the bottom car as much room as possible coming up off the corner. If you take a line where you're not driving up all the way to the wall, the bottom car doesn't really have any idea of when they're going to have to react off of that, and it'll cause a lot of door banging and contact. And door banging in oval cars hurts aero, and that pretty much will kill your race. So anything to avoid contact is respectful racing and good etiquette between two cars engaged in a battle. Sometimes letting a car pass you is more beneficial to you than if you were to try to battle them. There's a couple of situations. First, if you're trying to save tires and the car behind you is not trying to save tires, letting them by makes it so that you don't have to burn your tires trying to defend them, and maybe, and most likely, they'll come back to you at the end of the run. Another situation is if a car is obviously faster than you and coming up quick, and you have a couple other cars that are kind of waiting in the wings but more close to your speed, If you burn too much stuff trying to fight the car that's probably going to pass you anyways, then you're going to have less to defend with for the other cars that are slowly catching up or maybe were even with you to begin with. Slotting in behind the faster car is respectful racing, but it's by no means expected. Moving on to lapped car etiquette. There's a lot of people that debate what a lap car should do when leaders come up on them. In fact, it's usually a topic of radio chatter. But what lap cars really mean in fixed series is usually that they're off the pace for some reason. If you're in a longer league race or an open race, maybe you'll have some lap cars that are more close to your speed level. But if you're in a fixed race, most of them are just going to be off the pace for one reason or another. If you find yourself in this situation, maybe with damage, maybe you're just off the pace, it is best just to give the leaders the preferred line, because doing any sort of battling with them is probably not going to help anybody. If you're in a situation where you're about to get lapped but you have similar speed to the leader, maybe you had to make an unscheduled pit stop or something, then it is more generally acceptable to fight with the leader to stay on the lead lap. But at the same time, just like we talked about before, if you are burning off your tires just to stay ahead of somebody, it might not end up being beneficial to you because there's always the lucky dog. If you are forcing any contact or doing any generally dirty moves that we talked about earlier to the leader though, that is very unacceptable in terms of oval etiquette. And finally, let's talk about blocking and using the bumper. So, in general, blocking can be an okay move, but we have to make it so that it's not putting the person who's getting blocked in a particularly bad position. My rule of thumb is if the person who is getting blocked has to check up for you, then you're just putting them in a bad position for no reason. You're giving them the option to pretty much wreck you or be nice and back off, and that's not a position that you want to put somebody in. My rule of thumb is if there is a fairly slow speed differential between the two cars and at least a half a car length distance between them when the blocker is blocking, then it is generally an acceptable block. Any much closer than that and you're putting both of you into risk where you're giving the person who you're blocking an option to hurt both of you or back off. Another thing about blocking is sometimes you'll see people blocking all the way to the yellow line, and unlike NASCAR, passing below the yellow line is actually illegal in iRacing, so do not make any passes or attempt any passes under the yellow line, and if you're blocking somebody to the yellow line in the first place, you're probably doing something wrong. And finally, in situations to use the bumper, really save that for late points in the run, crucial moments. Keep it in your back pocket, but it shouldn't be something that you're doing too often. And if you're ever going to use the bumper, you pretty much should always use it in a way where the other person is not going to lose anything more than this position to you. This ends up taking a lot more finesse than you would think, just doing the lightest amount of contact possible to get them out of the groove. So it ends up kind of being a skill to use, but at the same time, most of the people who are skilled enough to do this don't really go for bump and runs to begin with. But that being said, in today's iRacing, you will see a lot of the bumper used, and not all of it is particularly respectful technique. Alright, that's my list of iRacing oval etiquette situations. Do any of you guys have any situations that you want to talk about in terms of what's respectful oval racing and what isn't? Leave a comment down below. And otherwise, leave a like on this video if you want to see more videos like this, and subscribe as well. Alright, thank you all for watching. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I hope to see you all on the track.